Welcome back, focused learners, to the Explainer. August 2026 has really shaped up to be a month of absolute massive contrasts in the AI industry. On one hand, we're looking at completely unprecedented corporate growth and these staggering multi-trillion-dollar valuations. But, on the other hand, the industry is suddenly crashing headfirst into some very harsh realities. We're talking severe reliability crises and emerging global security threats. So today, we're going to break down this wild tension between these massive leaps in scale and the inevitable growing pains of trying to keep these gargantuan systems online and secure.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is how we're going to break things down today. First, we'll cover industry milestones and shifts. Second, the Great Model Shuffle. Third, Anthropic's IPO paradox. And finally, number 4, the open source threat. This structure is going to help us logically cut right through the absolute noise of this month's headlines. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Industry Milestones and Shifts. End of an era, dawn of billion-user scale. August 2026 marks both a huge changing of the guard in tech leadership and, quite frankly, an absolute explosion in AI user adoption. The scale we are seeing right now is simply off the charts. To kick things off, let's talk about the number 15. That is the number of years Tim Cook has served as Apple's CEO. Over the weekend, Apple actually held an internal celebration, about 200 people, just to honor Cook ahead of his formal departure on September 1st. It's truly the end of an era. But his 15-year tenure crucially culminates with the dawn of Apple Intelligence. And what this really means is that his exit essentially passes the baton from the hardware era right into the new AI software era. It sets the entire stage for everything that comes next out of Cupertino. Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is how quickly this enterprise adoption is actually converting into hard revenue. Microsoft just closed out its fiscal year 2026 with 30 million paid Copilot seats. 30 million! And going hand in hand with that massive adoption, Azure revenue jumped by a massive 43%. So we're way past the phase of just tinkering and experimentation. This is deeply embedded enterprise reliance. And speaking of massive adoption, Google just crossed a monumental threshold. They confirmed this month that Gemini has officially surpassed an incredible 1 billion monthly active users. 1 billion, with a B. To support that kind of staggering billion-user scale, Google is aggressively rolling out new enterprise tools, things like Admin Assist and new data loss prevention controls for Workspace. Because, when you hit that kind of scale, data governance goes from being a nice-to-have feature to an absolute non-negotiable necessity. Rounding out our look at scale, we absolutely have to talk about infrastructure. Hugging Face, which is essentially the central hub for open-source AI models, is reportedly exploring a sale, and the valuation being tossed around $13 billion. If this actually goes through, it would mark one of the largest AI platform acquisitions we've ever seen. It really just proves that the infrastructure layer, literally the plumbing of this entire ecosystem, is just as highly valued as the frontier models themselves. Which brings us nicely to part 2, the Great Model Shuffle, new engines, retiring giants, and EU roadblocks. With all these users and all this money on the line, the massive platforms are aggressively swapping out and upgrading the engines that power their tools. There is a fundamental reshuffling happening right under our noses. If we break down exactly how the ecosystem is shifting, the cross-pollination is just wild. The lines are totally blurring now. For instance, Apple is actually utilizing Google's Gemini 3.7 Flash to power Apple Intelligence Search in their iOS 27 beta. Meanwhile, Microsoft 365 is utilizing dynamic routing. That means they are seamlessly switching between OpenAI's GPT 5.6 and Anthropic's Claude, just depending on whatever the task is. Elsewhere, OpenAI is updating ChatGPT with GPT 5.4 Mini, and Google is deploying their Gemini 3.7 Flash model into Gemini Spark across over 160 countries. So the distinctions between who actually builds the model and who serves the end customer, they've never been more intertwined. Let's zoom in on OpenAI for a second. They're actively consolidating their entire lineup. As of August 26, the O3 model is being officially retired after a 90-day sunset period. Replacing it for free and Go users is the brand new GPT 5.4 Mini, which is actually being delivered through a new thinking feature. It's a very clear move to unify their ecosystem around the GPT 5.x family architecture. And why does this actually matter to you? Well, unifying the architecture drastically streamlines developer updates, it reduces system latency, and it creates a much more consistent experience across the board.
So the crucial point is right here, especially for all you enterprise administrators. Please pay attention to this one. Right in the middle of all these updates, Microsoft quietly made OpenAI an auto-enabled subprocessor for GPT 5.6 class models in Microsoft 365 tenant data. If you manage an M365 tenant, you need to review your data privacy toggles immediately to ensure this aligns with your organization's internal compliance requirements. It is a tiny little toggle, but it has massive data implications. And speaking of compliance, we are seeing a massive geographic split in how these features roll out. Over in the US, developers testing iOS 27 Beta 7 are already enjoying Siri AI refinements powered by Gemini 3.7 Flash. But across the Atlantic, in the European Union, it is a completely different story. Siri AI remains entirely blocked on iPhones and iPads. This is entirely due to ongoing compliance delays with the EU's Digital Markets Act, and as of right now, there is literally no confirmed resolution date. But let's look beyond just the flagship models, because AI is aggressively embedding itself into our daily workflows. It's not just a list of updates anymore, it's ubiquitous integration. In specialized fields, Microsoft is opening Dragon Copilot so healthcare partners can embed AI directly into physician clinical software. For everyday workflows, OpenAI is bringing ChatGPT to Linux desktops and expanding ads across 31 European markets. Meanwhile, Google is entirely replacing its workspace side panel with a unified Ask Gemini command right inside Google Chat. AI is no longer a destination you visit, right? It's the environment you actually work in. Now let's pivot sharply to Section 3, Anthropic's IPO paradox, massive valuations versus operational hurdles. We've talked a lot about massive growth and all these shiny new features, but what happens when that relentless acceleration suddenly hits a brick wall? Let's take a look at Anthropic's very complicated week. Anthropic is on an absolute fast track to the public markets. They filed confidentially back on June 1st. And according to Bloomberg, we are expecting their public S1 registration to drop as early as this week. All of this is pointing toward a highly anticipated market debut targeted for this October. I mean, going from a confidential filing in June to a targeted debut in October is an incredibly aggressive market push. It clearly signals they want to capitalize on this AI boom right now. And this brilliantly illustrates the central tension of the entire industry right now. On one side, you have a financial narrative demanding perfection. Investor discussions are literally pointing to a mind-blowing $2 trillion valuation target for Anthropic. But then, on the other side, you have the operational reality. Claude just suffered its 8th significant outage this August alone. To give you an idea of the severity here, let's just look at what happened today. At around 5 a.m. UTC, Anthropic systems started throwing elevated errors. And this wasn't isolated. It knocked out Claude Mythos 5, Fable 5, Opus 5, and the older Opus 4.8. It impacted the web interface, the developer API, Claude Code, and their new Cowork integration. The whole shebang. Remediation was still ongoing nearly 2 hours later. This is the ultimate friction point, right? Public investors are going to intensely scrutinize whether this level of operational maturity actually matches that astronomical $2 trillion price tag. And, as if preparing for an IPO and managing server outages wasn't enough on their plate, Anthropic is also racing to meet regulatory demands. They just rolled out machine-readable watermarks for Claude-generated content. Why right now? Because they have to meet strict new transparency mandates required by the EU AI Act that just kicked in on August 2nd. But honestly, regulatory compliance might actually be the very least of the industry's worries when we look at the broader global stage. Which brings us to our final section, number 4, the open source threat, from competitive edge to attack surface. We've looked at the massive corporate scale, the model shuffling, and the growing pains of infrastructure. But there is a darker implication to all this massive AI capability, and it has entirely to do with how these tools are accessed globally. Up until now, the open source AI community has largely been celebrated as a democratizing force, right? It's seen as a competitive edge that prevents just a few tech monopolies from controlling the future. But recent developments are really forcing us to step back and ask, is open source AI a competitive edge, or is it an active attack surface? At what point does that wide open access transform into a live vulnerability? A really jarring report from Bloomberg today sheds light on this exact issue. They report that Chinese state-linked hackers have actively integrated DeepSeek and other open source AI models into their offensive cyber operations. According to the findings, these open-source tools are being weaponized to accelerate attack planning and targeting against Western organizations. This single report fundamentally reframes the conversation we're having. The AI narrative is shifting from a simple model performance race to a live national security threat. The implications here are just huge.
It means that enterprise CISOs and national security agencies now have to treat a highly capable, open-source repository with the exact same scrutiny as a breached firewall. It changes the entire global threat landscape. Which leaves us right here. We are watching AI hit a staggering 1 billion user scale. We're seeing companies targeting $2 trillion valuations. But as the outages at Anthropic and the security reports surrounding DeepSeek show us, the growing pains are very real and they're incredibly serious. So the question I'll leave you with today is this. As AI hits billion-user scale and $2 trillion valuations, will innovation outpace reliability and security? Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today. Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you next time.